Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndall Curtis. Job losses in the finance sector and the retail sector, combined with job cuts and prospective job cuts in the manufacturing sector, are the downside of what the Prime Minister calls the challenging structural change underway in the Australian economy. But in question time it boiled down to A, will the carbon tax make it worse, or B, will the mining tax help? Also probably not helping was the Four Corners interview given by Julia Gillard last night, which raised the spectre of leadership questions again. Joining me to discuss the day's events are Labor MP Nick Champion and Liberal MP Alan Tudge. Welcome to you both.
G'day, Lyndall.
Alan, if I could start with you first. We'll come to economic issues in a moment.
Sure.
But your Deputy Leader, Julie Bishop, sought to embarrass both Mr Rudd and Ms Gillard over the leadership, using a question about the changing leader in the Maldives, what the now ousted first democratically elected leader of that country says was a coup. Was that a mistake?
I don't think it was a mistake, but obviously it was a little bit light-hearted in terms of that particular question and highlighting, I think, the leadership challenges on the government side as well. I mean, right at the moment we have great leadership instability on the government side between Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, and it is on for young and old. It's not the media making that up. It is absolutely on.
But was it right to effectively joke about what has happened in the Maldives, something that Kevin Rudd pointed out the Commonwealth ministers are looking into that could ultimately lead to the suspension of the Maldives from the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I don't know. It was both. I mean, it had some serious aspects to the question as well, and it enabled the Foreign Minister, if he chose, to give a more serious answer, but obviously it had a double meaning to it as well.
Nick, while many of your colleagues backed the Prime Minister, a few have asked whether she should have taken part in the Four Corners interview. While I'm, as a journalist, all for politicians being interviewed, as a strategic decision, was it the wisest one?
Well, look, on the matter of the Maldives, I mean, it's completely inappropriate for the opposition to be asking questions that make light of what is a very serious situation, and I don't think it's appropriate at all. I think they should probably get back to more serious areas of public policy. On the issue of whether or not it's sensible to go on, TV, on the ABC in this case, or Four Corners or any other program, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you don't go on, then the media rounds on you and says that you're hiding from them. If you do go on, they pillory you for what you say. So as a politician, you are, there's no good way out. I think the Prime Minister's always been very forthright about her views, and she hasn't shrunk away from going on Talkback Radio with Alan Jones, going on Four Corners. People who are fierce critics often and want to hold her, to the light of scrutiny. I think it shows some bravery to go on to these programs and to answer the questions that are put to her.
So I think that was one of the issues. She didn't answer the question, though, on that particular program.
That's just not. That's just not
directly about whether she knew speech was an acceptance speech was being written for her.
And she's answered those questions on ABC, and there was a fuller transcript, which is now on the net, as I understand.
I mean, she subsequently has come
and she's done press conferences today, which she's fully expanded on that. So you can't really say she's hiding from scrutiny or questions. She's facing up to, to her responsibilities as Prime Minister. I think she should be, congratulated for doing it, frankly.
Is that the message you get back from your electorate about the Prime Minister, that they see her as fronting up to critics?
Well, look, I think the one thing that my constituency knows about the Prime Minister is that she's tough. She gets things done. She got rid of work choices. She's defending auto workers. She put a price on carbon. All these other blokes talking about it, Turnbull and Abbott at one time, he didn't know where he stood for a long time. John Howard had a commitment. She's the only one who actually gets anything done, and she's going to get private health coverage, changes passed by the Parliament tonight, and hopefully the ABCC too.
We'll move on to the economy. Alan, do you think the economy is going through a structural change that will cause some pain, but in the end make Australia better able to get the benefits of a rising middle class in Asia?
Well, at the moment I think there are obviously some changes going on in the economy and some overall structural changes. But there are also a lot of job losses which are occurring at present and which will occur over the next 12, 24, 36 months, which are frankly due to policies of this government. And I mean that in no disrespect, but when you have economic circumstances like we have in the globe, and when you face the prospects of of job losses, then what you need to be doing is putting in policies that create jobs and create a positive business environment. What the government has done is exactly the opposite to that. It's re-regulated the labour market, for example. It's introduced new taxes. It's brought back the Australian Building. It's got rid of the Australian Building and Construction Commission, which did so much for productivity. And of course, it's going to be introducing the carbon tax come 1st of July of this year, which will cause the losses of hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Nick, one of your colleagues, Doug Cameron, says the phrase being used by the government, the new economy, isn't helpful, that the government should be doing more to put a brake on what he calls the mining bubble, to take pressure off the dollar and off jobs in other industries. Should the government will be imposing a mining resources rent tax, but should it be doing more to try and bring the dollar down?
Well, look, the biggest problem is currency. I don't think at the end of the day governments can necessarily intervene in the currency. We have to learn to live with a higher currency because of the mining boom. But the changes we've put in with the mining tax are all about taking some of the profits, the excessive profits, the super profits that are earned by this industry, and giving them back to small business in the form of tax cuts, giving them back to the community in terms of better infrastructure and higher superannuation. And that retains a portion of the savings for the future. So that's a pretty good plan to give some relief. Obviously, for businesses, and particularly manufacturing, that are affected by the high dollar, we have to work with those businesses to see them through this period. We're not sure about how long it's going to go on for. I remember businesses in my own electorate really aiming for, expecting a currency of about 90 cents and then it going to $1. So I think it's now at $1.08. That's really the big structural change that's in our economy, this high currency, and all the stuff that Dan talks about is really a bit of a sideshow compared to that appreciation of the dollar.
I agree with Nick that the high currency is absolutely a problem for many businesses.
Isn't that a continuing problem when mining is so strong that there is in reality very little the government can do about that?
It is pushed up, of course, by high commodity prices, and that's one of the main drivers of our currency in this nation. Of course, it is also pushed up when interest rates are higher, and they are higher due to the fact that we have massive budget deficits.
But the Reserve Bank's cut interest rates a couple of times, and the currency
and they're still higher than what they could be. If you run high budget deficits, it puts upward pressure on interest rates. That is
when we
fact.
had a surplus,
and to say that that's the only issue, yes, the currency is a massive issue for manufacturers, for other businesses, export businesses particularly. But without wanting to be a broken record, the carbon tax is also enormous in this regard. I mean, you look at the aluminium industry, for example. Now, the Treasury's, your government's own figures say that the aluminium industry will be cut by 50% due to the carbon tax versus what it would be in 2050. 14,000 jobs lost as a result of the carbon tax. Now, these aren't my figures. These are the government's own figures which are suggesting that.
Well, let's just go back to the original point about the currency. And you're saying, there's all this debt causing an appreciation in interest rates. Well, that's clearly not true. We had a surplus under John Howard, and we had higher interest rates than we do now. What is actually driving the appreciation of currency is two things: commodities and currencies.
That's not true. We had on average
just listen. Well, let me finish my point. Right, currency, the commodities boom, and secondly, currency speculators seeking a safe haven in a really controversial, topical sort of world environment, economic environment. So they're the big drivers, and they're not likely to change in the short term. In regards to carbon pricing, I've got a fair chunk of manufacturing in my electorate, and they're preparing for what's coming. So, I mean, I've got a major glass manufacturer in my electorate, and they've made all the bottles thinner, right? And that is saved on their power and on their carbon. So what will happen with businesses is they'll make investments to become more efficient, to emit less carbon. That's what a cap and trade system does. So that's what it did when it was implemented in the United States to get rid of acid rain. That's why you never hear about acid rain anymore, because they put a cap and trade scheme in and it worked. If businesses become more efficient.
If I could move on briefly to the events in the Parliament. The Speaker, Peter Slipper, began what will be a regular Tuesday event in the sitting week. It began a procession through the King's Hall so the public could see him. He followed behind the Sergeant-at-Arms carrying the mace. Nick Champion, is a little more formality a good thing?
Well, I wouldn't want to reflect on the Speaker, but I do actually think traditions and formality are important, and they're particularly important because the traditions we have here, we inherited from Westminster, from the British, who sort of helped found our democracy. So I actually think that's a pretty important thing. Certainly reflective of my heritage. So I'm not complaining.
Alan, it didn't really though improve behaviour in question time, did it?
No, but what I would say is that despite Peter Slipper becoming the Speaker in quite controversial circumstances, as you know, he's actually ended up being a reasonable Speaker so far, and certainly is at least trying to get the government to be directly relevant when they're answering their questions, something we haven't seen much certainly in this term of Parliament. As for the pomp and ceremony, yeah, I don't particularly mind it. I didn't like it when Harry Jenkins didn't wear the robe, for example, but possibly Peter Slipper may have gone a little bit too far.
Nick, Peter Slipper threw out 4 Coalition MPs from Question Time. You were thrown out today. Should politicians pay be docked if they get tossed out of Parliament for bad behaviour?
Well, they are. If you get chucked out for a day, you do lose a day's pay. I'm not sure about the hour. The hour was introduced just to give people a bit of a rap over the knuckles. I've had a rap over the knuckles today, but I'm passionate about politics and I'm passionate about the issues we discuss. Sometimes I'm a little too passionate.
And Alan, do you think that suspension of people for an hour works well?
Oh, listen, it obviously sends a message when the Speaker does that. The former Speaker, Harry Jenkins, used to give a warning to people before he ejected them, and I think that's probably a fairer system.
So a bit of notice for people.
A bit of notice. If someone like Nick is misbehaving, then maybe he'd get a warning first and then be kicked out.
The problem is I used to ignore the warnings. That's a difficulty.
How do you both sit in Question Time? It was probably the feistiest we've seen this week. The noise level from both sides was quite high. Do you have any suggestions for improving it, or how do you explain it to your voters if they ask about behaviour in Question Time?
Look, my experience is people frequently complain about Question Time, but people also want to see you passionate about what you believe in and to have convictions, and they like to see a bit of life and humanity in their politicians. So I think we get a little contradictory messages there sometimes. What I do think is it would be better for everybody if the matter of public importance debate was televised as well, because I think often there you see a proper debate and that would help to put Question Time, I think, into a bit of context.
And Alan?
Yeah, I actually agree with Nick on that one. I think it would be beneficial to have the matter of public importance debate, which typically immediately comes after Question Time, for that also to be televised. It's often a very good opportunity for both sides to have lengthier speeches outlining their particular case and their plan in relation to a topical issue. I mean, today's was about jobs. I think that would have been a good one to televise.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Alan Tudge and Nick Champion, thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.
Thanks, Lyndall.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill today. Please join us at the same time tomorrow.